Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is Die Hard with a Vengeance.
It's Die Hard in New York City. Oh, my voice. Oof. It's that hangover that I've been nursing all morning, Phil.
Have some aspirin. Have some
do you
aspirin with a
have
very
any aspirin?
specific
I've had a hell of a
Canadian
headache.
pharmacy on
Yeah, that's how
on
I
the
solved
label.
the mystery of where the gold went, was to look at the aspirin bottle and realize that it's north of the border.
So big movie. We're a Die Hard podcast. This is one of the only 5 Die Hard films. This is a big deal, special movie. So we have a very special guest today. We have a writer, journalist, editor at Dexerto.com, and more importantly, one of my favorite human beings. A very warm welcome to Mr. Chris Tilley.
Hello, fellas. Hi, Liam. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Chris.
So honoured. Thank you for having me on a Die Hard episode of the Die Hard podcast. And it's one of the good Die Hards. I feel so honoured. I'm so excited to be here.
There's
we're thrilled to have you.
It's a chance, not a small chance that it's not one of the good Die Hards. So I'm glad we got you before we got there. Oh my goodness, yes, bullet dodged, much like the bullets McClane dodges in this movie.
So Chris, what's your you're a big Die Hard guy, right? Like, let's get that the first movie. Like, what's your general relationship with this franchise?
Yeah, I mean, like most of my generation, I discovered Die Hard on video and was a massive fan from day one. And I guess in my capacity as a film journalist, I've written about that first movie a ton of times. I've interviewed Steve D'Souza about it. And so, yeah, and even the most recent films I was covering as a professional journalist, those weren't as much fun. And I do tend to, if I'm going to watch a Die Hard movie, I do tend to put on the first one rather than watching any of the sequels. But yeah, it's a franchise I love, and it's obviously a character I love. So, big fan here.
Yeah, and Liam, I know I'll talk about my history with it in a second, but you're a New York guy, right? To some extent.
Oh,
and
yeah.
This movie is important to you personally from that standpoint.
Well, I should say before that, I saw this movie opening night with my father and my best friend. Like, I was primed for this. I was 13 when this movie came out. My dad had shown me Die Hard. I'd seen Die Hard. Die Hard 2 until this one came out was my, I'm going to put something on in the background kind of movie. It was Die Hard and Die Hard 2. And I saw this opening day. I loved it. I've always loved it, despite some reservations about certain things about it. And I lived in New York from 2008 until 2020. I lived in Harlem for a period. I went to school in Harlem and lived uptown for a while. I was on the 3 train, which figures really prominently into this movie. I used to ride the 3 train to go to Lincoln Center to see art films basically every day that I was in grad school. And I rode the 3 train to New Lots Avenue, the way end of the line, every week for work for a long time. So despite only living in Manhattan for a year and going to school there for 2 years, then this is a Manhattan movie. It's very, very close to my heart in terms of I think it is up there with Ghostbusters as one of the great mainstream New York City movies, if not the great mainstream New York City movie, especially for the first hour.
It's one of the great New York movies, also one of the great hangover movies.
Yep.
And Bruce has done a trifecta, I would say, with Last Boy Scout, this, and 16 Blocks are the 3 great hangover movies.
I forgot about 16 Blocks. He does have a hangover in that.
And no one rocks a hangover like Brucey. I mean, he's the king. He's the king.
I was like you, Liam, though. I was there opening night with my mates because that summer, it wasn't a great summer for movies. We had Waterworld, there was a crap Batman, there was a rubbish Judge Dredd movie. Like, this was our film. And
Batman Forever? Is this the Batman Forever summer?
Yeah.
That's a rough movie. I like that movie, but only in retrospect. When it came out,
95 was no 94, put it that way.
Yeah.
94 was non-stop bangers.
And so went opening night with my mates, and it delivered. This film does deliver.
My God.
It was a great time at the movies.
I saw it with my dad too. I remember it quite vividly because it was a rare sort of boys' week where my mum was away studying at Open University, if I remember rightly. So my dad and I had the house to ourselves. So it's a bit like, you remember that Simpsons episode where Homer and Bart are sort of left to their own devices that are making garbage angels in the, on the living room floor. But my dad and I had this great week, and this was the starting point of it. And we did other things. We went camping. That was a disaster. We had a couple of nice bike rides and some fun things. But basically, my dad and I went to see this. I think it was the start. It was the sort of opening event of that week. And we absolutely loved it. It was just, as you said, it delivers. It was just pure, rock'em sock'em entertainment. Just a movie. Just chomp your popcorn and have a great time. This movie's terrific. We're going to get into the weeds, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of it.
Can I tell you a really quick dad movie weekend story? Just a very quick one that I think you guys will appreciate. My dad and I used to, in the summers, we would rent a house on Cape Cod, and there were always a few weeks because my mother was a teacher where she had to be back home, like prepping for school to start or whatever the case was. So my dad and I would go down on weekends. And I remember one weekend we rented The Godfather, The Bridge Over the River Kwai, The Longest Day, Charade, and Topaz, and watched them all over a long weekend. And that's big dad energy right there. Seeing The Godfather, I think I was 11 years old, and he was like, "Let's go." Is really distinct. We didn't leave the couch. We weren't making dirt angels, but we were sitting in the remnants of pizza and soda, watching some of the greatest movies ever made, and it was very, very special. So I understand the boys' week.
Did you start that weekend a boy and end it a man?
No, that was
go and kill a bear or something at the end of it.
Unfortunately, Chris, that happened much later to me.
Well, let's put some of this stuff in the context. We were just talking about 1995, which wasn't quite as strong a year as 1994, although we did have some great movies like Crimson Tide that we just did, and we're going to have some great ones coming up. So Die Hard with a Vengeance was released by Fox in the US on May 19th of 1995. Directed by John McTiernan, the original Die Hard director, who also produced along with Michael Tadros. It, of course, stars Bruce Willis, Samuel L. Jackson, Jeremy Irons, and a stellar ensemble cast that we're going to talk about in detail in a subsequent section. It was an original screenplay written by Jonathan Hensley that was repurposed into a Die Hard sequel, and we're also going to talk about that in a moment. And on an estimated budget of $90 million, it grossed $366.1 million. It was actually the highest grossing film internationally of 1995.
Did it come out in the UK later in the summer? I feel like back then it wasn't as simultaneous, the releases.
Sometimes it was a little stagger, right? I remember when you would go on holiday, when you go on vacation to the US, there would be one of the perks was you'd get to see movies maybe a few weeks ahead of schedule.
That's the only perk we have over the rest of the world. You guys have socialized medicine, but we get movies earlier, so it really worked out.
The fun thing about that success, though, is that it was a bit of a disaster for Fox, because the only way they could make the financing work on this film was to offer the international rights to another company called Synergy in exchange for a big chunk of the budget. And that was because films made more money in America than the rest of the world at that time, apart from Die Hard with a Vengeance.
Yeah. Andrew Vagina was laughing all the way to the bank. We'll get into that, actually. That brings us quite neatly into our next section, where we analyze microscopically
Die Hard DNA.
Don't worry. I was gonna make sure I stole your thunder on Home Alone. I wasn't gonna do that again.
I don't want to talk about it.
I slapped my own wrist many times. I don't sleep thinking about that.
Okay, well maybe you need to relax a little bit. I don't know if it's that bad.
So in terms of, obviously the obvious one, this is a direct sequel, but it's really more closely connected to the story of the first film than the second. Bruce Willis is the only principal cast member to return, with the exception of, anyone know? Come on, children.
It's the wife. I'm sorry. Is it the wife?
No, it's McTiernan Staple, Anthony Peck, who played Al Powell's partner in Die Hard, credited as young cop, returns here as the character of Detective Ricky Walsh. Is he the same character?
No, he's not. He's not the same character.
Yeah,
Stop doing that.
Some people think so.
I actually want to talk briefly about the Bonnie Bedelia of it all. I can't believe Harley.
Yeah.
It's not her on the phone, right? It's clearly someone else's voice.
Yeah, I don't think. Do you even hear?
Yeah, because when he drops the phone, when he realizes that they have to go to north of the border, you hear like John, you son of a bitch, or something like that. And it's always bothered me that I'm like, that's not Bonnie Bedelia.
If that was Bonnie Bedelia, I hope she got paid $1 million for like two lines. I do miss her, and I want to talk about things that we might miss. Same director as the original movie, new producing team. Joel Silver, who did the first two movies, is out. Andrew Vanya of the aforementioned Synergy is in as EP in exchange for those foreign rights that Chris just mentioned. Same composer as the first two films, Michael Kamen, but another new cinematographer in Peter Menzies Jr., following in the footsteps of Jan de Bont and Oliver Wood. Another new editor, this time with John Wright, who also did Speed, following in the footsteps of Frank J. Urosti and John F. Link for the first film, and Robert A. Ferretti and Stuart Baird for the second. Now, this is an interesting one. Production designer Jackson DeGovia returns and again utilizes the fictitious Pacific/Atlantic courier company that connects the Die Hard franchise to the Speed series. Do you know about this, Chris?
I mean, I've heard it.
So basically,
you're not Phil, is what you're saying right now, Chris. You're not.
Chris is just like, get a life.
No, you guys can't see, but behind Phil, there's just like a Jake Gyllenhaal and Zodiac level bunch of like charts and graphs and material up on the wall. He's really gonna like figure it out soon. He's so close to unraveling the.
Yeah, I'm almost there. I've almost cracked it.
This podcast is evolving.
I've almost cracked it. But basically, so this company, this is the logo on the truck that Hans Gruber and his team arrive in Die Hard. It's also on the truck that blows up at the beginning of this film, and it's on the plane that the bus crashes into at the airport in Speed. So if you want to know more about that, we did a whole deep dive on it in our Ricochet episode where we did a full explanation of the Die Hard ECU. So we won't get into it more now, but it is interesting to me, if nobody else. So now the other thing that a lot of people...
I feel like I'm at a staff meeting right now. What's happening?
A lot of people now, if you've got a passing interest in Die Hard mythos, and maybe not to the level of nerddom that I take it to, but a lot of people know about the Simon Says spec script, but the story actually begins quite a lot earlier than that. So what I thought was quite interesting, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because I know you're a very diligent journalist, Chris, and you do so much research for when you've done your shows. But so please, guys, chime in. But this script actually started life out of a spec script that was called Troubleshooter by James Haggin. That script was acquired by the original Die Hard producer Larry Gordon's company in 1990, and it featured John and Holly on a Caribbean cruise that was seized by terrorists. Now, apparently, this was part of their thinking was like it was the Towering Inferno Airport Poseidon adventure paradigm, right? The first one is in a building, the second one is in an airport, and the third one had to be on the water. So it was like a rule of three. That was the idea with that one. W. Peter Iliff, the screenwriter of Point Break and Patriot Games, was brought on board to rewrite it. But Gordon had also already commissioned another script that was set on the QE2 cruise liner that was written by Walter Wager, who wrote 58 Minutes, the novel upon which Die Hard 2 was based. But both projects were ultimately scrapped because of another script called Dreadnought, which turned into Under Siege. Yeah.
I finally know something. It feels good.
So, and then basically they had a lot of problems putting this project together. There were rising costs, and as you just alluding to, the expense of the movie and how they were going to cut up the pie, Willis's salary demands, which had gone up and up. Die Hard 2 was an even bigger hit than the original movie. So Fox President Joe Roth turned to Andrew Vanya to structure a deal with his newly formed company, Synergy. Shane Black was approached to do a story. He turned it down. John Milius was hired. But that version of the project went nowhere. There's amazing quotes about this where Milius said...
imagine
what would that be like?
Die Hard movie?
What would that be?
Oh my God. Our conservative king makes a Die Hard movie. I want it.
More guns.
Apparently he
More
said...
guns.
I know, exactly.
He said, I'm an American advisor on this movie. I'm an American advisor in Laos. Like, it's just everything you're seeing through the prism of Vietnam for this. These are direct quotes I've got about Milius. So we never found out what his take was going to be. Then Die Hard 2 co-screenwriter Doug Richardson was hired, and his script had McClane in LA battling cops who were trying to steal from the Federal Reserve using the newly built subway tunnels. So again, some of this stuff is like Speed adjacent, both like the troubleshooter premise, which sort of becomes Speed 2 Cruise Control. And then this one is, which, the newly built subways in Speed was like, integral to the premise of that movie. Then John Fasano of Another 48 Hours developed a treatment in which McClane's daughter was kidnapped. That sort of has some of its echoes in Die Hard 4. So, but this kind of take your pick approach to scripts made Willis really uncomfortable. Apparently, it was sort of like, it was almost like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And he was like, this isn't really maybe the best way to approach it. So
I heard he was turning a lot of them down and saying no, but I think he was right to turn down all the Die Hards on a boat, because I think by that point people would have switched off a little bit. That, you say the rule of three, but I think people can suspend their disbelief only so much. And if you're doing building, airport, boat, I think people might have clocked out a little bit.
I think it's also interesting to think about like the kind of like throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks of the like, we're past the purity of we're past the purity period of like action movies, right? Like they're continuing to make all this money. They're trying to like come up with these new combinations of ways that things work. It feels kind of close to like the superhero era where it's like, let's just make a bunch of this stuff and see what sticks. And it's like, I like the idea that Willis was like, whoa, like let's get back to brass tacks. People want McClane. People want, and this is just me guessing, people want a Gruber, like people want to feel like they're watching something in conversation with the original, which is what I think is so successful about this movie, is the way it converses with the original movie, including like one of the greatest reveals of the last 30 years of movies, maybe certainly up there.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree, and I think he was right, and he was very, very protective and thoughtful and careful about this character. I mean, this has always been the role that kept Bruce Willis's career afloat. Right? We talked about how he would take crazy chances in between the Die Hard movies, and a lot of them failed. Bonfire of the Vanities, Hudson Hawk. And then some of the stranger movies he did in the '90s, like North or Color of Night, or
Mercury Rising,
Nobody's Fool, or This was so important to his career. It kind of it was like the ballast for everything. So he was right to be very, very cautious. So eventually they kind of lost his mistrust. So then Vanya goes to McTiernan, but he wanted to make Last Action Hero, and then he wanted to make Captain Blood, which was a remake of a Errol Flynn pirate movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So that project quickly collapsed despite Schwarzenegger's enthusiasm for it. And then enter Simon Says. So Jonathan Hensley, the screenwriter, was a New York guy, former attorney, and he was starting to build a rep as a writer. He'd written several episodes of Young Indiana Jones Chronicles and was going to write this movie, Captain Blood, for McTiernan, but that project collapsed, and McTiernan asked what else he had. And as luck would have it, he had sold this spec script, Simon Says, to Fox, the studio that owned Die Hard, for $1 million in 1993. And the script, this was really interesting to me. He was built out of an idea from his own childhood where he'd hit another kid with a rock, fortunately without serious consequence, when he was a kid, and obsessed over the idea that this kid would one day return years later to torment him. And that was the sort of genesis of this idea of this kind of revenge element. And that's why the childhood riddles that are part of the bomber's MO factor in. And the sandwich board scene was in the original script, and it focused on this New York cop called Alex Bradshaw. It had echoes of Dirty Harry and In the Line of Fire, those kind of movies where it's like a voice on the phone dragging someone around a city.
Right.
Yeah, I actually read the script for Simon Says.
Oh, love to hear this. Yeah. Go for it.
It's interesting. I mean, the first half is almost exactly the same, and then the second half is completely different. The dialogue, the action in the first half, but the hero couldn't be more different. Alex Bradshaw. There's a whole paragraph on what a straight arrow he is. Always gets his taxes on time. It says he's a moral and balanced man. So it could be more different from John McClane, but obviously that's quite a boring central character. So it's made more interesting. But Zeus is exactly the same in his script. I think the major change is that there's a sequence where Simon goes after Zeus and sends Zeus to an Italian-American neighborhood where the Italians don't like African Americans, and makes him dress up as a pimp walking around the neighborhood.
Oh, man.
So that would have been a pretty big sequence in the film, a pretty big set piece. But yeah, I think what's interesting is Simon Says makes more sense than Die Hard with a Vengeance, because the kid, Simon, is his real name is Clarence. And when Alex meets him when he's a little boy, Clarence is being beaten up by his racist alcoholic mother. And Alex is friends with black kids, and Clarence's mother doesn't like that. She hates African Americans. And so that's why all the race stuff is in the Simon Says script. It's because Clarence has been brought up a racist. John McClane hasn't, and Simon hasn't in Gruber in Die Hard with a Vengeance. So that's why there's a I don't know, there's a bit of a disconnect. There's some strange scenes in Die Hard with a Vengeance that are quite uncomfortable to watch now. That come out of a script where it was all set up in the first half and through flashbacks. And so
interesting.
I had another bit of background on that was interest to that point, which was apparently in the novelization by Deborah Cheel. It explains that Zeus's brother was killed by cops during a botched raid. Hence his deep mistrust and hatred of the police. Have you got it there? Oh, wow, you're like 2 steps ahead of me.
I've got the novelization here. I'll be honest, I haven't read that. I read the Simon Says script.
Let's take a pause and we can start recording again in like 5 hours just to get like a book report. That would be ideal.
I'm committed, but I'm not that committed.
That would be commitment. Sure.
So, but basically, yeah, as you can see, this had a really quite a tortured road, right? To all of these different fragmented things. The other, I wonder if you came across this, Chris, because there's misinformation out there about this. That at one point, Zeus started out in one iteration as a quote. I'm quoting here, a Eurasian grocer, and Hensley had Brandon Lee in mind for that part before his passing, which would have. Was in 1994, I think. So
I heard Hensley saying about this that when Fox bought the script from him, and these are direct quotes, he said they told him they wouldn't change anything, and then in their first meeting with him after they'd purchased it, they wanted to change everything. And so the things they told him was the Harlem scene has to go, and they told him Zeus has to be white or Korean. And he just lost his mind over this and had a massive go at them. And so they released him from his obligations to rewrite the script. So he was off the project, but very smartly, that's when he mentioned it to John McTiernan, who said, well, this could be Die Hard 3. John McTiernan goes to them and says, I want this for Die Hard 3. And that's how he ends up back on the project, because McTiernan sent it to Willis. But yeah, I wonder if that comes out of the demands that Fox were making for changes that they needed made to that script.
Well, it's also just interesting to consider, and I hadn't thought about this, Chris, until you mentioned the going to the Italian-American neighborhood and dressing like a pimp, but we're 6 years after Do the Right Thing, which is such a fascinating exploration of, Italian-Americans in New York versus, African-Americans, and the kind of like, and that, I think that movie is one of the great American movies ever made about race, and in some ways one of the great American movies, but like, one of the things that I think is really interesting about this movie And I hate to be the guy who's like, you couldn't do this now, but I don't know if the scene in Harlem would be in the movie now. And I think that there just might have been a higher degree of tolerance for like racialized content in an action movie being so laid bare. And like, you say there's uncomfortable things in this movie. Like McClane says some stuff in this movie and Zeus says stuff back, but really it's McClane where you're like it really plays with those dynamics in like a frank way that I think are a little more challenging than they were then. At least, it feels like it would be hard to do it now.
Yeah, our hero calling Zeus out for being racist, for not liking white people.
Yeah, exactly.
It wouldn't work in this day and age. And yes, that scene in Harlem, the use of the N-word there, in a film written by a white man and directed by a white man, I don't know if it plays now. I mean, even if it was just I hate black people was on the board, the scene would work and it would have the same intention. But it just, I don't know. I mean, famously, they had nothing on the board when they were filming it for fear that there would be an actual riot and Bruce Willis would be killed. So that was put in using early CG effects, that writing. But
and there are nice moments in that sequence, like when he walks by the old lady, which is like so painful to watch, right? Like when she's just looking at the board and Willis, they're both really good in that scene, and Willis is good. But like, you're right. I think the like sort of racial politics and who's making the movie make it a lot more challenging than it would be now.
It's just that it feels quite throwaway because Simon turns out to not be a racist at all. I don't think he's just doing all this to commit a robbery.
There was sort of a trope in the 90s where, this is something that makes me uncomfortable when I go back to watch films from this era, which is just like characters that are casually racist. For no, every time, and something will happen and there might be a conflict. It happened actually in Under Siege 2. A movie that we're going to be discussing next week. And there happened to be an African-American character that's confronting like a bad guy, and they're going to get into it, right? There's going to be some dialogue before they like fight. And please don't go there. Please don't go there. Please don't. And they do go there.
I remember
and you're just
what you're talking
it's
about.
It's like, it's so uncomfortable and unnecessary. But I also feel like this is somewhat the Tarantino effect, right? There's a direct correlation between this film and Pulp Fiction, which the Tarantino films of this year, especially True Romance. Also, it's in Reservoir Dogs a lot, and it's very aggressive in True Romance, and it's even more aggressive to some extent in Pulp Fiction. Just straight out racist dialogue and racist epithets were just part of weird, like mainstream movie culture. So it was something that was around in movies. But to your earlier point, where I think you could make a case for its defense, is that this is a film about the melting pot of New York City and all of the different cultural collisions with the police, racist police. Note the scene on the subway with the overzealous. The worst thing Samuel L. Jackson has done is like jump the
the turnstile
got a ticket
jump,
and he pulls a gun. Like those kind of things that are just real. So it's looking at the problems of New York City in a kind of warts and all way, but in a way that's very like provocative and striking. Just to cap this off, and then I want to move on to our next section. And I wondered if this had come up because you've spoken to Stephen D'Souza, but they tried to bring him in during production because they were having problems, particularly with the third act. And at this time, Jonathan Hensleigh was actually committed to another movie, Jumanji, and couldn't do work on the production. So they tried to bring in Stephen D'Souza, but he was under contract during Beverly Hills Cop 3, which I think we can all agree is an absolute travesty. And despite his willingness to dive in, he couldn't do it. Did that ever come up?
No, but I think that's a real shame because I have heard Jonathan Hensleigh talk about the second half of this film, and he's not happy with it, and he's frustrated and embarrassed by certain problems that we'll get into, contrivances, coincidences. It comes close to falling apart because of these decisions, and so it probably needed another going over that second half. He obviously spent years writing Simon Says. He wrote it in 11 days in 1992. But he had a long time to develop that, and then I think they just had to figure out this second half very quickly. And maybe if someone had come in with fresh eyes, then they could have fixed some of those issues that I think
D'Souza
really
was a bit of a genius at that as well, especially when you learn what he did actually on the original Die Hard and some of the intricate threads that he was able to connect. In particular, the iconic Gruber, McClane, Bill Clay scene that was added during production. D'Souza really was kind of a genius on set rewrites and figuring out some of those complexities.
There's an elegance, isn't there, to the way that plot fits together that is sorely missing from the second half of this film.
That's perfectly said, actually. Well, that brings us quite neatly to the end of this section, and then we'll get into this in a little more detail in our next section, Anatomy of an Action Movie. We'll be right back after this break. All right, we're back, and we're moving into our next section, Anatomy of an Action Movie, where we explore the tenets.
We live in a twilight world.
And there are no friends at dusk of an action film. Chris, tenet, thumbs up, thumbs down?
Guy?
No, God, no.
Oh, boy. All right, well.
God,
moving on.
God, no.
At least you were honest and not mean about it. Some people are like, you idiots.
No.
Okay, so after that tortured path, what we ended up with is the following premise for Die Hard with a Vengeance. So, while back working for the NYPD, Detective John McClane is targeted by a mysterious terrorist named Simon, who effectively holds New York hostage and forces McClane to complete a series of deadly puzzles around the city to prevent further attacks. In the process, McClane teams up with Harlem store owner Zeus Carver, and together they uncover Simon's true agenda and his real identity. And in terms of the ticking clocks, what's amazing about this film is that there's a ticking clock every 5 minutes. There's not just one ticking clock, it's just constant ticking clocks, which is pretty cool, as we say, for certainly the first half or 2/3 of the movie. But this, in terms of analyzing this premise, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about evolution versus repetition, right? This premise is very different to the other two films. It's a different story paradigm, it's less contained, it's more expansive. Andrew Vanya did have an interesting point about this that I thought was quite telling. He said, Die Hard is a guy in trouble in a box. Whether the box is a building, an airport, or a city, it's still a box, which I thought was quite interesting. But I'm going to step back now because I want to get your thoughts on what does this film have to say about sequel evolution? Should they repeat the formula? Should they evolve it? This film kind of does both. How does this fare as a premise in its totality in your minds, guys?
Well, I think the first half of the film really works as a reinvention of the franchise that has got an amazing hook and then delivers on the promise of the premise. I think it really works. I mean, in a way that then 4 and 5, I couldn't tell you really what's they're about, what's going on there. They get too big almost, and they forget what is important about John McClane, and it's putting him in these pressure cooker situations. And while we've got an entire city, the situations he put in are quite self-contained. And I think that's where John McClane works best. And I think they lost sight of that in 4 and 5. So yeah, I think it's exactly what they needed to do with the franchise at this point. And then maybe they needed to turn back and go back to basics with 4 rather than, spend more money and have bigger stunts using more computer-generated effects.
Yeah, I think that's always the problem. I was thinking about a very particular action franchise that I finally caught up with last week, and I was like, boy, I'd really love for them to go back to the simplicity of the first film in this franchise. But I agree with you, Chris. I think the first hour and 15 or 20 minutes of this movie are pretty unimpeachably masterful. I think there's a command and a grasp over. I would say to me, the first hour and 15 or 20 minutes of this movie are as good as the original. I think it's really special. I think Willis achieves a kind of wearing of this character in this film that he masters the character in this movie. Like, of course, he's incredible in Die Hard and Die Hard 2, but Die Hard 2 is so rehashy in some ways and happens so soon after Die Hard that you're kind of like, okay, like we're with this character again. I think he's incredible in this role here. I think what's really special is the way they sort of toss off Nakatomi Plaza. Like, he's famous for 15 minutes, and I'm fascinated by the decision to make him just kind of like a guy that nobody cares about anymore. I think is really, really special. The hangover is really important. But I want to very quickly, I hope this is quick, reference our last conversation about John McTiernan, Phil, which was in a little movie called Last Action Hero, which I think is incredible.
Yep.
And we talked about how, like, for McTiernan seems to be as interested in, like, the milieu of his characters or what his plots have to say about the world. And I think what's so special about the way that this film expands outside of it is it gives you so much richness of city, place, and character. I would watch a 10-season show about McClane's precinct. I'm in love with Graham Greene in this movie. I'm in love with Larry Brigman as his boss. Everyone is incredible. You feel like you're in a real place with real people, despite like some of the New York City vibes. Like the kid was like, "It's Christmas, you could still City Hall." Like it's absurd, but like it feels like a real place and a real milieu. And I think Jeremy Irons and the crew, it's incredible. It's just incredible stuff. So I like how it builds on the original's like sort of Cracker Jack one location premise and does this really expansive thing on it.
What's just occurred to me off the back of what you just said, because I completely agree, is that in a crazy way, in a crazy Tenet-like way, it's both a prequel and a sequel to some extent, because we're seeing what McClane's life was like prior to Nakatomi. We're seeing like the grind and the drudgery and the brutality of like being a New York cop. And these presumably were all his colleagues, right? Now, obviously it's taking place temporally afterwards, but it's actually expanding our view and understanding of the character. So it's actually going in both directions.
And because we understand him as a character. You know what's crazy about this movie is it's about 8 minutes before McClane gets on the phone with Simon. That is crazy because so much happens in the first 6 minutes of this movie. The department store blows up. They find McClane. He's in the van. We know that he's estranged from Holly. We know that he's hungover. We get to know Graham Greene's character. Like, Zeus shows up. They escape barely, right? And like, there's that great where he calls him Jesus.
In, right?
Like, I look Puerto Rican to you. Like, we know who everyone is, and then we get Simon, and it's just amazing. It's so...
I mean, it really is like, like we've seen, because what's so interesting, if you place this in its historical context, this is 1995, and there's now been several Die Hard on a Blank style films, which almost forced them, as we discussed with the production history, to be like, hey, look, we just can't replicate the formula, like you just said, Chris. I think you're right. Audiences would have rejected that. They would have rejected John and Holly on a Caribbean cruise. That might have been fun in 1991. They maybe could have got it done like right off the back of Die Hard 2, but the landscape had changed. You needed to reinvent it in some way. And this is such a fresh, brilliant way to just expand and open it and dig in deeper on the McClane character. So why don't we talk a little bit about, move into our hero section, and we'll talk about this version of John McClane. How is he different? How is he the same? And how does he compare to the two previous iterations that we've seen in Die Hard 1 and Die Hard 2?
Well, I haven't seen Die Hard 2 in a long time, so you'll have to remind me of that. But I guess I like the way that they want to put him at a disadvantage. They want to give him a weakness early on, because he is a Superman, really. And so you substitute the bare feet from the first film for the hangover here. And so I guess that puts him on the back foot, although he always seems like he's working with a hangover. So I don't know if today is any different to any other day. But yeah, it's funny. In terms of who he is as a hero, I heard that the screenwriter said John McTiernan compared him to a cartoon that he'd seen of, what was it? It was an eagle flying towards a tiny mouse, and the mouse is giving the eagle the middle finger. And John McTiernan said, that is John McClane. Speaking truth to power.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a very funny comparison.
It's called The Last Act of Defiance, that cartoon. It's like quite well known, but I caught that as well, and I thought, gosh, that's brilliant, isn't it? Doesn't that just zero in on what's so important about this character and what Willis was so desperate to protect the whole time? Because apparently he was very concerned that he could come across as arrogant or smug, or, you know, he was just too quippy or whatever. And he was very, very concerned about protecting the essence of the character. But because he was always that, because he's always the mouse facing this gigantic eagle, we're on his side. And the quippiness and the sort of sardonic humor keeps it. We actually like that, right? And to me also, that feels very East Coast specific as well, dude. Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's the wisiest ass of wise asses, you know? And I think Bruce Willis is an East Coast guy. And this movie is a great East Coast working class movie, right? So many of the people in this movie are like working class heroes, which is glib and reductive, admittedly, but like I am always impressed by how the movie lingers on the janitor locking the doors, or the way the teachers are getting the kids to sing "Row, row, row your boat," right? And the melting pot aspect of New York is so interesting in that it portrays public schools as places where there's like a whole variety of different types of people. Yeah, he's a great. That's a digression, but he's a great East Coast guy, and the movie supports his East Coast why. You're talking to an East Coast wise ass. Like, he is a East Coast wise ass to the 1,000,000th degree. And I've never really thought about it that way before, Phil, but you're absolutely right that he is.
It just doesn't play. I mean, you know, when he turns up in LA, it's like stranger in a strange land, right? California, right? Like the vibe here is very, very different to the vibe in New York City, where it is that sort of, it's almost like your armor to some extent, right? Because it's a hard place to live. It's an intense place to live. And especially to be a cop in, you know, that kind of urban environment. So I think it's just such an interesting evolution of the character. And to some extent, again, to the prequel point, kind of a devolution. He's borderline alcoholic. He's completely estranged, and if not now totally divorced from Holly. But I will
also
say,
a psychopath. The way he murders people in this movie, like the whole bit when he's in the tunnel and he's like, "We got reports of a guy in a snowsuit," and then he just murks those guys.
He does love a little murder.
Like, there's no way he's 100% sure that those guys are terrorists. Like,
I know.
And he just blows them away.
Like, fuck it.
And then the guy who's John, who's like, "Are those guys dead?" And he's like, "I'm afraid so." And you're like, "You're sick. Like, you're ill at this point." But I think that supports like how at the beginning of this movie, this guy is absolutely at his lowest.
Yeah.
His lowest point. I mean, it's incredible that, you know, he agrees to put that sign on and go into the streets of Harlem, like Mad Bomber or not. Like,
I just think it's so, when you compare to these other Die Hard on a Blank style movies that we've talked about, like look at like Jack Traven in Speed, or Casey Ryback in Under Siege. Those are guys who have got their shit together. Like, okay, Casey Ryback is in Under Siege, has got a lower status job, but he knows what he's doing. And Jack Traven is really good at his job. This guy's a fucking disaster, right? Like,
he actually isn't. He's a good precursor to later era Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible, where like, you're a fuck up. Like, you somehow manage to succeed all the time, but you're a fuck up, right?
And that is integral to Die Hard. I think that is such a critical part of why these films work, especially the first, the first film and this film. We talked a little bit about how in the second one, Liam, you were like, well, he's almost too much got his shit together in the second one for your liking.
Yeah.
You know, because he's actually, his relationship
like
with Holly is good.
He's got like a nice sweater on in the second movie. He's like drinking less. Like, it's not as...
We don't like that. We want him drinking.
You know, the roots of this, the roots of this character fundamentally are the detective, right? Like, there's a scene in this movie where he goes, "I'm a cop." And like, no better thinker and figure outer in the late 80s, early 90s in movies than Bruce Willis. You know, looking at the aspirin bottle and realizing what's happening in this movie. You know, he's a detective. He figures these things out, whether it's the aspirin bottle in this or it's the last Boy Scout bathroom or whatever. Like, Bruce Willis is a great thinker on screen. He doesn't get enough credit for how smart he makes this character. And I think his like... The thing that's so great about McClane, beyond his alcoholism and his rage and his sociopathic behavior, is that he's like a detective. He's the detective, right? And the movie never loses sight of that, right? Well, and it makes it so special.
I'd also say as well, you mentioned Under Siege and Speed. And I think the brilliance of these films is you wouldn't watch a drama about the protagonist in Speed or the protagonist in Under Siege, whereas you could watch a drama about John McClane played by Bruce Willis. You wouldn't need action. You could just see his life,
Yeah.
the problems he's got, the
Great point.
troubles he's having with booze, and it might be an award season contender. So I think that's what sets these films apart as well, is that he's just such an interesting character. He does so much with so little, as you say, Liam.
Yeah.
And Bruce Willis is a dimensional actor, right?
Amazing.
Even though people like he's a big movie star and an action star, he is also a very dimensional actor. He can play a character that has multiple facets to their life, as and that's why he would work in a drama, as you're saying. Shall we talk about the other hero of this movie before we move on to the villain? Just briefly, I think we would be. I've just realized, we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't talk about Zeus. What a fantastic addition. We've lost several key characters, right? We've lost Holly McClane is not in this. Al Powell is not in this.
No Marco.
Dick
it's Thornburg. A real problem.
No Marco. No more Marco.
There's no Marco. It's very no more Marco.
But we've gained Zeus for one movie, though. And what an impact, though.
Yeah, talk about the evolution of the Die Hard franchise, and obviously that's the other thing we've not said, is that it's a solo action hero, and it becomes a buddy movie this time around. And who better than pairing Bruce Willis with Samuel L. Jackson, his Pulp Fiction co-star? And it's funny, when I was reading the Simon Says script, when I watched the film, I was thinking, they've changed that line and that line because they've seen Pulp Fiction, and this feels much more like Quentin Tarantino type dialogue. But all of that stuff that those Samuel L. Jackson lines were in the script before they cast Samuel L. Jackson. But the one difference is Zeus in that original script solves a lot of the problems and saves the day a lot more. But I think once it became a Die Hard movie, all those jobs were given to John McClane because he's the hero. Bruce Willis wants probably the glory and all those things.
A moment that I caught to that point, but I think it's teamwork though as well, isn't it? Like, for example, I love that moment, where because he's an electrician, Zeus is able to figure out how to pull out the wires to take off the brake locks in that sequence where he's able to spin the car around. So they actually have and he's able to carjack the vehicle as well.
Insane. Again, McClane's like, I'm going to just flip the car around and shoot these guys, and then we're going to, it's just nuts.
Fucking rocks.
Rocks.
I don't give a shit about physics.
It's really good.
I love that.
Off the rails at that point.
Yeah, it really has. That is actually a metaphor for the movie itself, right?
I think it's when he shoots Wile E. Coyote style out of the water tube, and Samuel Jackson is just there, that you're like, okay.
It does start to get a little crazy. But
one thing I noticed in this rewatch, which was probably the 40th rewatch, is that, first of all, Samuel Jackson's very, very important to me. My son's name is Samuel, and part of the reason he's named Samuel is because of Sam Jackson. He's just a guy that, really, not the only Sam that influenced that choice, but a major one for me. I love Samuel Jackson. I've always loved him. He's always been really important to me.
Have you got another son called Zeus?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's when we have another one. Not gonna happen. But there's a moment. He spends the whole movie being like, one of my favorite moments in the movie is, you mean one white guy killed another white guy's brother, and now I have, I'm stuck in the middle of this, it's great. He's so, clearly defined. But then when he finds out the bomb is in Chester A. Arthur Middle School, there's this great moment where he's like, I'm going to jump down to the boat. And McClane's like, you're going to die if you do that. So they put up the winch, the line there. And he's like, I'm the first one who's going to go. I'm first this time. And it's small.
He's a hero. He's a hero.
But he answers the call to action. And I think it's a great, third act problems of this movie aside, I think they do a great job of Samuel Jackson's arc going from being somewhat apathetic or resigned to having to help to I have to do something because my nephews are in this school in Harlem, right?
I think he's socially conscious, right? He cares about his community and his neighborhood, and he's a great, such a great character. It also is interesting. I thought they styled him a little bit after Malcolm X, which I think is also kind of worth noting. That was a very intentional choice with the glasses, the white shirt, and he's quite formal in his attire. He's awesome, and it was such a great choice, I think, to turn it into a pseudo buddy movie and just have that
Oh,
banter.
I think it makes it work. I
well,
think
McClane doesn't have, he has Al Powell on the phone, right? But for a lot of the first movie, it's just him soliloquizing, like, and going, how are you going to get out of this, John, on his own. So now you actually give Willis, who's amazing at repartee, as you see in like Last Boy Scout and, many other movies, if he has the right chemistry with another actor, it's electric. So these two guys together, it's just such a treat. Let's talk about the villain. Simon Gruber, played by the imperious.
Oh my God.
Jeremy Irons.
Oh my God, guys.
Thoughts? Just top line, hit me.
Chris.
I mean, I guess I can't believe that the villain on the other end of the phone was German, and then I didn't clock in the cinema. I didn't make the connection. It feels like, what are the chances that in 3 films, 2 of them are German? So I feel like, I don't know how they got that twist over on all of us, but certainly for me, I didn't see it coming. I think he's a really imperious villain. I think he looks great in that sleeveless blue number.
Oh, hell yeah, dude. What's that guy doing for fitness? It's amazing.
Apparently he was sailboat racing around the world at that point. So
really?
He was in incredible shape, yeah.
I'm less comfortable with, I think, the moment where he shoots Zeus, he's eating an egg. And so a hard-boiled egg.
I don't like that.
So does that mean he's been carrying around a hard-boiled egg in his pocket for the movie? And that doesn't seem like a very cool thing for a villain to do.
Maybe he had a lunchbox.
Exactly. Little Lunchables.
Not cool.
He went to like an American supermarket and bought some Lunchables.
Yeah, I don't like that.
But he's in great
Angel
shape.
Heart vibes.
He's in great shape, which makes me sort of sad that there's not a huge showdown between him and John McClane. Because obviously that didn't happen with Rickman. That's fine. Rickman was this skinny guy in a suit, but now you've got someone that I feel like could be McClane's equal, and we don't get that moment.
And he's a soldier as well.
There's a missed opportunity with the McClane-Matthias Targo relationship. Matthias Targo is essentially Carl, if we're going to make a corollary there. And I think that the actor who plays Targo is great. He really stood out to me in this watch. So unfortunately, it like doesn't set up their showdown in quite the way that it should.
I just feel like there's a scene missing. You're right. Like unconsciously now you're saying
there's a couple scenes missing in this movie.
They have a confrontation on the boat, a verbal confrontation, but there isn't. They don't really. There's a. And that sort of comes to the ending and the alternative ending that we'll talk about. We can talk about. Well, let's talk about it now.
Well, real quick, I just have to say that I think Jeremy Irons is equal for me to Alan Rickman in the original. I think he's incredible in this movie. I have a softness for this film in some ways that like it just really was important to me when it came out, and I love Jeremy Irons. I think he's incredible. I think he's, again, you cast an actor with the experience that this guy has as a real stage actor. You give him good dialogue, you keep him mysterious, you let him do this weird stuff with the accent, and I think, like I said before, that the name Gruber mean anything to you, and then the cut to Hans, I'm like flying. I'm in space.
and the music. You get a few notes of the
when
music
that
as well.
happens.
Yeah.
Like, and the way Ricky goes, like, the thing in LA. Like, it's that, like, to be an old man right now, but like, no Marvel movie cameo will ever touch the revelation that Simon is Simon Gruber. It's amazing. It's just because we didn't really have that before this movie.
No, it was a genius choice.
Yeah,
and it's so effective. And I've seen it like 20 times, and I still get goosebumps.
My soul
thinking
leaves
about
my
that.
body,
how well
guys.
directed it is as well.
Yeah, well,
the guy in the back,
Yeah, and like the guy chewing that shithead chewing his glasses, and the like him saying he's from a different agency. Again, that McTiernan no trust and authority kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
I think is very,
it's
very
so
good.
cool as well, because it's like it's urban and street movie, and then it goes like global. Now like feds are involved and it's international, and this guy has a deep history of complicated espionage. Man, it's fucking great. It's so good. But just to touch on that alternative ending, because it does feel like that confrontation scene, this sort of mano a mano, the Bill Clay scene, if you like, is missing from this film, and they kind of have a version of it in the alternate ending. Which have you guys seen?
I watched it yesterday for the first time.
I'd love us to post it on the Twitter feed because it's really worth seeing. It almost plays like an incredible short film. Basically, what happens for anyone that's unfamiliar is, and this is available on the Blu-ray. In the alternative ending of the film, McClane, Simon Gruber gets away and ends up in some mysterious Eastern European country.
It says Hungary in the notes,
right,
but
Hungary?
he's not speaking.
Yeah, I don't think they say. I don't think they say. You don't see it, right?
Yeah,
You're just
but,
in
and the
some
other thing is that
bar
I think he's in Switzerland
or cafe, right?
Yeah.
Some mysterious European country, and McClane has tracked him down. Arrives with a rocket launcher, a short, small rocket launcher, of which he's removed the directional sights, sits down and basically plays his version of McClane Says and gives him a number of riddles. It's a little bit like the Battle of Wits scene in Princess Bride, right? But played much darker and sinister, and it's sort of, basically he says, you have to press the button and it's either going to kill you or it's going to kill me, and it's which way is he going to turn it and fire it. What ends up happening is McClane is wearing a flak jacket, and that's how he's protected himself, and Gruber ends up blasting himself with this rocket-propelled grenade at like point-blank range. It's a brilliantly directed and acted scene, but I gather that the reason they ultimately decided to not use it was that, to your point earlier, Liam, it made McClane cross the line into true psychopathy. Like it made him seem too, I think, cruel and cold-blooded and premeditated, rather than a guy like you're saying, the mouse fighting the eagle that's just thinking on his feet and always has to survive. And this was a very almost like a serial killer almost to some extent, but it's a truly brilliant scene in its own right, worth checking out.
And I think an issue as well audiences might have had when they were testing it is there's a feeling of injustice to it as well, because John says that he's been fired, he's lost his job as a cop because the feds thought he had something to do with the robbery. And so that kind of undermines what you've watched for the last 2 hours in terms of watching our hero and then finding out he got the blame for the whole thing. You wouldn't be leaving the cinema with the same sense of satisfaction, I don't think.
It also doesn't cut out of... Look, maybe there would have been a different scene, but it doesn't cut out of... When it cuts away from him looking at the aspirin, he grabs Zeus, and suddenly we're north of the border and we have our final confrontation. Like, one of the great things about Die Hard is it respects this idea of, like, time and place. These films take place not in real time, but over a 12-hour period, right? Like, I spent the first minute and a half watching that scene between Irons and Willis being like, how long has it been? Where are we? What's happening? Like, it just wouldn't, it would need, like, a different scene leading into it where, like, he's gotten away and Willis calls Holly and, like, he looks down and he sees the aspirin bottle and it cuts back to him and then it, like, has a slow fade. Like, it just doesn't cut with the
feels
way
like a
the
Bond
rest of the
film.
movie
Feels more like a Bond film.
Totally, yeah. Or like just a different style of movie, and like I don't know, the ending isn't really justified unless like Simon kills Holly or something like that, which would be such like a depressing way to end.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like a personal revenge mission to do something really, really sadistic as well, like and go really, really
also,
out of
why
your
would
way.
they fire him?
Because they thought he had something to do with the robbery. That's what he says.
That's right, but that doesn't make sense, right?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't work.
I mean,
but
Jonathan Hensley said that they had real problems with the ending. So in the original Simon Says script, the ending happens in Battery Park in Manhattan, and it's a big fight. It's a showdown between hero and the two heroes and the villain.
I love that.
Simon Clarence gets stabbed, and then Zeus saves the hero Alex by grabbing the bomb and throwing it in the water, and then Clarence, because he's been stabbed quite seriously, runs towards it and jumps into the water and blows himself and the bomb up as he's falling back into the water, which is fine. But he wrote another before they got to the ending they ended up in. There was another ending for with A Vengeance as well, where there's no stuff in Canada. The boat explodes. You've got John and Zeus paddling to shore, with Zeus saying it's a shame the bad guys got away, but the briefcase bomb ends up on Simon's plane. And John says, "Don't be so sure." So it cuts to Simon on the plane. He sees the bomb, and then he says, "Anyone got a 4-gallon jug?" And the plane explodes. which is a
right. I read about this.
That's a rubbish line, but that's what Jonathan Hensleigh wrote. I don't think they shot that version, but they just couldn't figure out how to end this film, and I think what they ended up with, it feels tacked on.
It definitely is like it reeks of reshoots, right? The helicopter sequence at the end, and I do like that. I don't know why, but I really love that sign, that neon sign. That's like there's something really kind of iconic and cool about that. But the sequence does feel like a bit of a rush job, like this'll have to do kind of thing. We just need to get this in theaters
really
now.
Weirdly, and like they clearly shot coverage with iron separately from, at least to me, Willis. Like they don't feel like they're in the same place at the same time overall. Except it does have the great "Hey dickhead, did I come at a bad time?" line, which is like one of the great asshole lines from the series. It's very good.
Well, what I also thought was really interesting, and McTiernan's commentary of the film is actually quite self-critical, and there's a point in it where he said, this is the point where the film goes wrong, in his opinion. And it's the moment where it reveals that the bomb you think is in the school, right, is actually harmless. And the real bomb is on the boat that McClane and Zeus are on. And McTiernan says, I think that was just one twist too many. And you almost lose the audience's trust at that point, because you're almost like, what's real and what isn't now. We invested a lot of suspense and tension in that school bomb situation, and there's got a fantastic actor there, Charlie, I think, right, who's the bomb disposal guy who
I love that guy.
You love him. He's so
great.
courageous.
I'm staying.
And you love that character, and you almost feel like he's been made to look a fool by it. So he basically was like, that's the point where the film kind of unravels.
I'd hate to disagree with our Shakespearean king, but I think he's absolutely wrong about that. Like, I actually think that is like classic Gruber stuff. Like, it's a misdirection. It puts everyone's attention on something else. Like, and also one of the things that's great about the Gruber family, which, that would be, I would watch that. I'd watch that show. But one thing that's great about the Gruber family is they're not psychopathic, right? Like, they're not actually ideologically sound, right? Like, this movie does the same thing where he has the rehearsed speech about the excesses of the West and how we have to blow up the gold. But of course, he's really taking the gold. He's not going to kill kids in a school. Like, that's just not something. He's going to make people think he's going to do it, but he's not going to.
But Liam,
that is so out of character.
He's just killed kids in a department store, and he's just killed kids in a station, or tried to. So he is a monster.
Yeah.
He said he's not a monster, but he is a monster.
Right. I see what you're saying.
Well, I suppose it's like collateral damage as opposed to like a specific going out your way to like target them. But what you've just said about the Gruber family, I just suddenly had this idea for an August Osage County style drama about the Grubers.
Germany
exactly about Hans and Simon and what was the parents like.
Works for the government and makes no money. Yeah, it'd be amazing. It's
like
The Lives of Others meets
I need to go write that play
right
now.
I think
a play. That's where the money is, Phil. Make a play.
That and podcasting.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm
a playwright and a podcaster.
The screenwriter did say as well that an issue with the climax was the geography of it all, was having the gold so far from the schools, and that Bruce Willis had an issue in terms of why would John McClane be going after gold when there's children to be saved on the other side of town.
That's a good point. Yeah,
it doesn't.
Not on this side of town. 40 minutes north of the city, right? Like it's like. There is something I really like that they end up, this is so specific, on the Sawmill River Parkway, which is like a treacherous road to drive on. So the fact that that's the choice they make is good. But yeah, it's like, it falls apart geographically. The first part of the movie is so geographically sound, but like they keep going further and further north, and they take this aqueduct. But no, I think you're dead on. Like, he would be trying to find the bomb.
Because it's kind of like, look, who cares if they get away with the gold? Leave them alone. Then, if there's no hostages at risk, like there are in Nakatomi Plaza or at the airport or in Holly's Plain in Die Hard 2, then the stakes aren't quite the same. Of course, there's a sense of justice. This guy's a monster. He's a murderer. We have to get him. Yes, that you can root for that, but not to the extent of if you think there's a school of children that are under threat. But let's move on. But before we do, I do have one question for you guys, which is one of my favorite questions.
As you were going to St. Ives, you met a man with 7 wives.
It's not a riddle. It's not a riddle. It's, who's your favorite terrorist?
Who's your favorite terrorist?
Do you have a favorite terrorist amongst the goons? in Simon's squad?
Yeah, I hadn't seen this film in donkey's years, and one of the main things I remembered from it was Katia. So I would have to say her, even though watching it now, she's barely in the film. I'd forgotten that she's essentially mute. She doesn't speak. So I was quite surprised watching it that she's, because her mannerisms and the way she kills that guy had imprinted on me that it's one of the first things I think of when I think of this film. So I've got to go with her.
It's a good choice. Yeah, that is burned into my brain forever. I want to very quickly say, and then I'll answer this question, that McTiernan is at his most powerful as a filmmaker from the moment Simon walks into that bank and the ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da kicks. Like, that is like McTiernan
I
is
agree.
symphonic. Like, again, my soul leaves my goddamn body the way he stages this sequence. It's like, it's chef's kiss. And that part of it, the sneaking dread as she like slides in through the gate and like that poor sap defending gold. Run away, you idiot.
Yeah.
Run away. It's not your money. But my choice is Rolf, played by
I had him on
Robert
the list.
Sedgwick,
Love
brother
it.
of Kira Sedgwick.
Is that right?
Yeah. The one who is like, he pretends to be the cop and then he says in German, like, McClane is here. I love that guy.
He's great, isn't he?
He's really good. I wish he was in more of the movie. I also love, this is like, I think, classic McTiernan, with the way the SWAT team guys cut their fingers on the way in. I love that the fake cop, the German guy, won't put the bomb in the car because
It's really
good.
good. What if some kid could get it?
Ralph goes like, some kid could find it. I like that mirroring of, you mentioned earlier, Chris, that like there's a psychopath, Simon's a psychopath, but like, I like that they're just terrorists. They're not monsters, these guys. I think it makes it a little, and in fact,
thieves.
like,
They're thieves.
They're thieves, and like, in fact, they kind of like Otto, the Hungarian murderer. They're kind of like, he's one of Targo's thugs. Like, there's this little bit of tension because like they don't paint these guys as one dimensional. I think they do a nice job, and I just really like Robert Sedgwick.
Let's have a 10-part series about Rolf on Netflix.
Let's do it. The Muppet from the Muppets, not the guy from this movie. We should make a difference there.
All right, let's move on. Do you have the action in this movie is pretty great, especially for the first 2/3. Do you have a favorite moment? Do you have a favorite action sequence, set piece, or stunt?
I think it's pretty great when a guy gets sliced in half by a cable.
Just in general.
This podcast distilled,
Yes,
right?
but what about the stunts?
Yeah, I'm going with that. Liam?
That's pretty amazing. If a good example of like lucky third act screenwriting, for me, it's the moment I just mentioned. The heist of the Federal Reserve is just like so exquisitely staged and amazing. I also think the opening into the explosion, while not technically an action scene, is just an amazing montage of New York in the summer and gets it right. And I think the subway platform, all the action's good, but the subway explosion is particularly strong.
What I don't like,
the
though,
chase is great too. The taxi chase.
The taxi chase is amazing.
Yeah.
What I don't like is the flood in the tunnel when we see John sort of surfing on top of the truck, because that's a glimpse at what's to come in this franchise that sends it off the rails when we're seeing a sort of almost animated version of Bruce Willis on top of a truck. It just does not look real. And what we like about these movies, I think, is they feel real, and we feel like we're watching real people doing real stunts.
Chris, I feel very safe with you, so I'm going to admit something that I don't know if Phil even knows, which is I've never seen Die Hard 4 or 5. I've never...
I mean, I would say...
I like Die Hard 4, by the way.
Do you?
I do like
Okay.
Die Hard 4. Yeah.
I don't.
You're right, Chris.
I don't. I feel like it's when I tell...
vibes.
It's. I feel like it's when I tell people not to watch Godfather 3, you know? I don't think you need it. I don't think you need it in your brain. I don't think... They feel like...
I once said to a friend, I haven't seen Rocky 5, and he said, I'm so jealous. Because of that reason.
Yeah, it's
right?
Rocky 5's exactly the
wish
same.
you could unsee it,
and,
And
I think they feel like almost fan-made films rather than... and maybe
Well
Bruce
said.
is phoning it in a bit, or it's... I feel like this is the last time we see John McClane. That's how I feel about those two movies.
You're totally right that is the moment where it changes almost tone. Change. It goes from a grounded movie that could happen, even if it's outlandish and almost over the top, to something that just straight up couldn't happen, right? Which it's almost. It's not quite Escape from LA bad, but it's not far off. It's like, whoa, you're heading in a very dangerous direction there.
Escape from LA is good. Look, here's the thing. I don't know what that was.
Are you all right?
When we started this podcast, I was like, you know what? Now's the time. I'm going to do it. Because I remember seeing the trailer for 4, and it was like, on July 4th, the choice will be clear. And I was like, nope, I'm not in. This is not my thing. I pulled up 4 on HBO Max, and I made it 10 minutes in. I was like, This is just like, until I have to, dutifully, for the podcast, I couldn't make it happen. So
yeah, again, it goes back to, can you look at these films as standalone action films or as sequels, which sometimes can be a different thing to do.
Die Hard 2 and Die Hard 3 really rock. You know, problems with the second half of this movie aside, it's incredibly watchable, and I like it, you know, more now than I think I have in a long time.
I think you nailed it, Chris. That is the point where it does become something different. And by that point in the film, although that tunnel sequence is like spectacular and original and really wild imagery, it starts to become a little, I think, almost cartoonish.
Superhero stuff.
And it's sandwiched between these moments that I was mentioning earlier, or alluding to, when John clocks the badge number because he's had that lottery conversation earlier on. That's too big a coincidence. And then the phone service going in and out when they need it and when they don't need it. Too convenient. Zeus's nephews being in the last school that's being targeted. Too much of a coincidence. And then ending with the aspirin bottle. It's like they've got four convenient coincidences. I think you can get away with one, maybe, but it's just, it's not good writing.
Too many and too
I'm going to push back, though, because
maybe.
I think the 6991 badge thing, sure, fine, but it's a great example of McClane as a listener. And
I like that bit personally. I thought
and
that
also,
was cool.
I think the bomb is planted after Zeus gets involved, because it arrives at 10:30 in the morning after the kids get to school. And the implication is he sent the bomb there to get Zeus's attention. They say that later in the movie.
Oh, did they?
I hear you.
I've got that wrong.
Why did it?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very intentional that the bomb arrives at that school after Zeus gets involved.
Good shout.
And then I'm not here to defend what I think largely I agree with, but the third thing is the aspirin bottle works for me because it's, again, McClane being like, oh shit. Like, and actually what doesn't work is when it gets explained in the alternate ending where he's like, I tracked the bottle to a pharmacy down the street.
Yeah.
Like, that's stupid. But McClane being like, wait a minute, this bottle is from Canada. I have a hunch this means something, feels like very in line with the McClane.
But it is almost like Simon Gruber may have just handed him his business card with his address on it. It feels like,
that's
I think
fair. Totally,
it does Gruber a little disservice to be like this criminal mastermind makes such a sort of cavalier error.
But they do an amazing job of setting up his migraines, like that in that scene. You miss it. You miss it if you're not paying attention. Where he's like, the only thing we know about him is that he suffers from migraines. And then McClane's like, excellent report. Like, they do a good job. Again, it's like McTiernan working with Hensley, the dramatist, being like, let's lay these little foundations for something that's going to matter later, right?
I mean, I think the final sort of my final thought on it, and we'll move
Welcome
on.
to Phil's final thought.
Phil's final thought is the first 2/3 of this movie are so fucking good that I can forgive
Where does
everything
it fall
else.
apart for you?
Everything else.
What's the moment? And I agree.
I mean, I think the boat, once it gets to that boat stuff, just the energy of the movie is pulling you in a different direction. Then the tunnel, then the physics of the tunnel sequence, and then the final helicopter thing is completely just feels like something from another film.
It's when the Simon Says script ends, to be honest. It's when it veers away from Simon Says.
Yeah. You're right.
Well, no one could crack this. The best minds in Hollywood, maybe Steven D'Souza could have, but we'll never know. But regardless, it's the first pot. The bits that do work are so good that they compensate for the stuff that is imperfect.
And you have pretty unimpeachable work from Jeremy Irons Bruce Willis, Samuel L. Jackson, and like McTiernan always knowing what to do with a camera, no
You
matter
don't-
like
it's-
what the story.
You don't
happens.
feel unsatisfied, even though the last act doesn't really work. That's how good the first two-thirds are.
You're right.
You know?
And I remember talking to a friend after it ended and him being like, the helicopter bus stuff, like literally the day
Yeah,
after
you don't
it
remember
opens,
it.
He was like, the helicopter stuff sucks. It's bad.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like I didn't have the critical faculty then.
Right.
I was like, that's pretty much the best movie I've ever seen, which was my mentality around every action movie that came out in the summer. Like, Face Off ended, and I was like, that's the best movie ever made. Like, I have a very distinct memory.
Take us back.
Yeah.
Right, let's get our tuxedos on and head to the Die Hard.
Wait a minute, the
Oscars.
humor. This movie's really funny.
We'll come to that in...
Your
I
best
was going to
line.
skip
Yeah,
it because we're
best
going to
line.
cover
Sorry.
it in Best Line.
Okay, yeah,
So,
you're right. Sorry.
let's pop the old
Sorry
tuxes on. I'm just trying to keep things trucking along. I don't want to have the same third act problems.
Yeah.
All right. The first award is the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line, of which there are very few nominees. I've got 5 here, but feel free to add. The old said, "Simple Simon to the pieman going to the fair. Give me your pies, or I'll cave your head in." I rather enjoyed that one.
That's good.
This line, as you said, Chris, is actually in the Simon Says original script, where he says he didn't say "Hey Zeus," he said "Hey Zeus, my name is Zeus, as in father of Apollo, Mount Olympus, don't fuck with me or I'll shove a lightning bolt up your ass." I love that, and that was in the original Hensley script. As much as it feels like a Sam Jackson
he yells,
improv.
"Do I like look Puerto Rican to you?" It's like pretty like tops.
It's
Samuel
great.
Jackson.
That
"Do I look
stuff
Puerto Rican to
is
you?"
great.
Like it's great. It's so good. Shades of get these motherfucking snakes off this motherfucking plane in this movie. It's coming. You can feel it.
This is my favorite is when they're driving the cab through Central Park and he says, are you aiming for these people? And McClane says, "No." "Well, maybe that mime." That was laugh out loud.
I actually cackled watching it yesterday.
"Hey, who was the 21st president?" "Go fuck yourself," said that the carjacked guy that had
that's
stolen
good.
the car. That was such a New York moment to me,
Yeah.
you know? And then the last one that I loved was where he goes, "You're a truck driver?" And he goes, "No, I'm a beautician." "Of course I'm a truck driver."
I have to tell you guys,
He's amazing, by the
my
way.
dad laughed for 5 minutes in the movie theater at that line. Like I will never forget the way my dad lost it. Like could not recover. Like to the point where people in the movie theater, it's like, is this guy okay? He could not stop. "No, I'm a beautician. Of course I'm a truck driver." Like it was just incredible.
The dialogue's great in this movie. So any picks from those or additions?
I'd go for the "Hey Zeus" line because that was the one I couldn't believe they didn't rewrite that after they'd seen Pulp Fiction, saying we need more lines like that in the movie. The fact that that was in there in 1992, it's a funny line and it's good for character. So and it made me laugh. So
It's a beautician line for me. I gotta give it up. Bill Billingham laughing for 5 minutes is a pretty important moment.
Oh, I love that. All right, let's move on to the Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. Now, I'm excluding our 3 leads this week because I want to talk
you
about.
You always do that, and you always include them, and it's
Well,
obnoxious.
I want to. I've taken your critique there, and so we can talk about this incredible ensemble cast, especially the unit in the NYPD. So I've got the following nominees: Graham Greene as Joe Lambert, Colleen Camp as Connie Kowalski, Larry Brigman as Inspector Walter Cobb, Kevin Chamberlain as Charlie Weiss, the bomb disposal expert, and Joe Zaloom, who we just talked about, as Jerry Parks, the truck driver with an aptitude for trivia.
I'm going for Sam Phillips as Katia.
Oh, yeah.
Because it stuck with me. And then doing my research this week, that's the only acting role she ever did. She's a singer. They cast a very successful singer as a character who doesn't speak. And then she was done with acting. And she looking her up, she did all the music for Gilmore Girls. That was her big career move after this, and the theme tune to Gilmore Girls. So
she didn't have to act.
She
doing fine.
She had a big album at the time she was casting this that had won Grammys and things. So yeah, for some reason, I think that character's really stuck with me. So that I would say that stole the movie because it stayed in my brain.
Fair.
Do you guys remember when Bong Joon-ho won the Academy Award for Best Directing for Parasite, and he gives this incredibly moving speech where he references Scorsese and he talks about Quentin Tarantino, but at the end he goes, "If I could, I'd like to take a Texas chainsaw and split this award into 5 pieces and like give it to all of you." That's how I feel about your list, because I can't pick. I think maybe this is the best. This is the most stacked this award has ever been, in my opinion. And like, I'm not joking. I'm like moved by how good the 5 people are in this movie. It's like action movie perfection. For like, this is what I want from any piece of entertainment that's like this, is to be like, I know who all these people are. This is, you know, we've talked before about how good action movies are about smart people doing their jobs, and everyone in this movie is a smart person doing their job, and like, I love it. I think it's really good. Quick little shout out to the phone operator lady who has the now should be canceled line, "I'm going to marry Donald Trump," but that's the only other person I wanted to reference when talking about this. I think that's a great list. They all deserve it. Special kudos to Colleen Camp for just being absolutely incredible.
I love her.
She's amazing in this movie.
Love her in it. I agree. Amazing ensemble. My pick for the record, even though I love all of those guys, and Katya, who's actually not, she's American, right? As well, she's not Eastern European or anything, right? So, and yet she seems to convey that somehow. It's an amazing performance. But Larry Brigman as Inspector Walter Cobb would be my choice. And you know what? One of the reasons so he's an interesting guy, just real quick. He was in the soap opera As the World Turns for a really, really long time. So he was a soap guy, but was also at the same time, a distinguished stage actor. And later got huge acclaim for his role as the judge in David Mamet's Romance. Which I saw at the Almeida with John Mahoney in that part. So he's done, and then he was in Spy Game. I has some incredible scenes in that with Redford. But the reason I love him so much in this, you know what? It's like, to your point, and film is like kinder to cops in the way that Die Hard, the original, isn't, right? That it's generally, they're almost all idiots except for Al Powell and McClane, right? These guys are actually, you say, they're competent at their jobs. They're not idiots like Dwayne Robinson and the FBI agents and whatnot, right? But it's the moment when he goes to the school and he's introduced to like the principal. I think her name's Principal Martinez. Yeah. He's like, "This is Principal Martinez." He's like, "Hello, Principal Martinez." And he treats her he like speaks formally to her, shows her so much respect, because it's like, this is her domain, right? He could just be like, yeah, whatever, we're fucking doing this and there's a crisis. But it's like, he's so believable as a like consummate professional in a high pressure situation that I think he's like fantastic as the inspector in charge of that unit. So he'd be my pick for that. The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie. Handful of nominees, a few New York dickheads. The business guy who refuses to let Zeus use the phone on the subway.
That guy sucks.
Played by Ralph Buckley. The overzealous transit cop who pulls a gun on Zeus for just jumping the stiles, played by Scott Nicholson. The condescending cab passenger, he's credited as business guy Taxi, played by Bill Cux.
What? You don't like white people?
I feel like that should have been played by JT Walsh as well. Like if he was still, I don't know if he was, like, that's such a JT Walsh part.
That would really tilt the Master Thief Award.
Yes,
JT Walsh showed up for 3 lines in the movie. Rip.
And the obnoxious shoplifting kid who you quoted.
It's Christmas!
Earlier. So I've got those 4 picks, thoughts.
The guy on the phone. The guy on the phone. Just annoying. That character is always annoying in a film. The person that won't get off the phone. I guess it doesn't exist anymore in movies because we don't use those phones anymore. But like, I find that.
Yeah, this is a great payphone movie. Besides Phone Booth, one of the best. It's the shithead cop. Why are you pulling a gun on a turnstile jumper? Like, I think it's great. So I think that's great. That's like.
What's interesting about that, Liam, is that in the script that was an older racist cop, and it was John McTiernan who said, "Let's recast it as a young nervous cop." So it's like it could be his first day on the job, and he's just overzealous.
Interesting.
I mean, he still seems a little bit racist, but yeah, he is. But he does look nervous, which is something that McTiernan added that I think makes that a little more interesting and less of a cliche.
It's way more nuanced. No, I totally agree. And I think it's also just like, I think that, again, like as a kid watching it, I don't think I was aware at all in my sort of like the way I grew up. But I think, considering that it's a couple years after Rodney King, all these things, like it's a really powerful, potent moment, and I think McTiernan like does it justice. It's really, really good. I love it.
All right, well, let's move on to our final category of the Oscars, which is Best Death. And we've already touched on this a little bit, but just before I move on to it, is Marco in the house? Is Marco backstage?
Turn your headphones down. Okay. No more table! Next time you have a chance to kill someone, don't hesitate.
Thank you, Marco,
sorry,
for
Chris.
presenting this
Thanks.
award.
Yeah. I'm retiring from the podcast after doing that. That's
you
it.
have to bring him back for a Die Hard movie. All right, so I've got Katya's slicing and dicing of the Federal Reserve Guard, McClane shooting the guy's point blank range on the elevator,
Jesus Christ.
the Cable slicing the guy in half on the boat, McClane disabling the brakes and spinning the Mercedes around to shoot a bunch of bad guys on the wet road, and McClane taking out Simon's helicopter. Some pretty good deaths when you actually have like 5 to rank. Because some of these movies, I'm struggling. I'm going to struggle next week with Under Siege 2. Well, that's all right, because we're going to talk about Eric Bogosian
yeah, that's
for 40
just going to be
minutes.
an Eric Bogosian conversation for 2 hours.
Anyway.
Do you want to go first, Liam, with this
staying
one?
in the present.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm going to go with the guys in the elevator, because I think that scene is amazing. I've rewound. I don't know what this says about me, but when he leans into the guy and blows him away, and he just basically explodes all over McClane, like that moment is like so incredibly well staged. I also think this totally gets ripped off by the Russo brothers for Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Yeah. Like it's and it which I think that's a good scene too, but like this is an iconic moment for a variety of reasons, and like the idea of like an outnumbered guy in an elevator, this movie kind of like defines that, I think, to some extent.
You just said everything that I was going to say. But yeah, I'm in total agreement. That would probably be my favorite action scene. I mean, I do feel like I don't 100% understand how it works, how he does what he does in that space physically, and if everything's going in the right direction, because it's shot at quite close quarters. And I guess the Captain America version, it's much clearer what's happening and how he's doing it. But John McClane's much more interesting than Captain America, so this is the better scene.
Yeah, I totally agree. Hey, Phil, who's the guy who plays the cop who brings him to the elevator? It's shades of the guy who plays the security guard in the first Die Hard. Those moments actually like really click together for me, him entering the building. But that actor's great.
Is he the one? Because I was going to say
Detective Otto, isn't it? Like he's just so convincing as like, I'm just a guy that works here, Is
it the sort of tall blonde guy?
Yeah, the Aryan-looking dude. Yeah.
It's interesting because I was going to say earlier, I feel like that the moment, to your point about when the symphony clicks, is when it pushes in on the badge and you realize it's the Federal Reserve, and that is just when all the orchestra is like,
You know what moment I love is the moment when the security guard that actually works there is chewing gum, and he looks down and he notices that everyone's wearing these like combat boots.
Oh, yeah,
and he kind of goes like, huh? And you're like, oh, that's like a young McClane. There's like shades of a young McClane in this
amazing
character.
Stuff in
just kind of
really
like,
is great.
Like he notices too late to do anything about it. Also, great line. I think we'll move straight to the withdrawal. That great Jeremy Irons doing the weird version of his actual accent.
About the gun that he's holding in that thing, which is like the Gruber gun. It's like a smaller caliber gun.
It
looks like a Walther.
Yeah,
and there's something that felt so Hans Gruber about that. You know what I mean?
Straight to the withdrawal.
Oh,
it's like so. Yeah, I sound like I have a lisp or something, but like he does it really well. God.
My pick for the record would be the disabling the brakes moment, just because I love how out of control the film is at that point. And I think that's a genuinely, again, like in screenwriting, those are the kind of like creative action sequences that like put your script over the top. That's like, I've never seen that, and it's just rugged and awesome and wild and crazy and in keeping with the kind of mad energy of the movie at that point. So that would be my pick. Let's take a short break and then come back for our final section of the show, the Double Jeopardy Trivia Quiz. We'll be right back. And we're back with our final section of the show, which is the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz where the scores can really change. Now, Chris, I remember the halcyon days of Tilly Trivia because you're quite the trivia king. I've often thought, like, Liam hates this. I like it. Some of the listeners seem to like it. They want to keep it. But I think trivia quizzes, is it a British thing? Why are we so obsessed with them? We love them, don't we? We love a little quiz.
It's become a thing in the States now. They have we call them.
Yeah, we actually love.
Yeah,
quizzes.
we call them pub quizzes. You call them trivia nights at the pub, and I think they've taken off. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you're saying Tilly Trivia. You're just saying I'm a geek, basically. And I guess I am. But the podcast I used to do, Clash of the Titles, we would do a quiz where we take it in turns to compete. And then I realised I found the competing too stressful. So I just became the host of the quiz every week so I wouldn't have to compete. And the other two did. And so they hated doing the quiz and I enjoyed it. And I feel like that's what's happening here.
Yes, that's probably right. It is more fun to be on the other side of it, possibly. So maybe I wouldn't, maybe if I was in Liam's shoes, maybe you should do that sometime. You can get your own back on me.
Well, it's just always like, in this case, it's like guy who loves quiz and a film history expert. So I'm sitting here like, cool, I'm sure I'm going to get the question right about the second AD on Die Hard of the Vengeance or whatever the case is going to be. No, I enjoy it. It's a little bit of a shtick, my dislike of it. I like it when I get them right.
Well, do you guys want to, speaking to that point, do you guys want to collaborate or compete today,
I'll do whatever choice? Liam wants.
Let's collaborate. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that'd be nice, and it sounds like you're not a competitive guy like me. I'm not competitive at all.
I'm too competitive.
No, I'm not super competitive with this.
All right, well, you guys can work together. You can do
work together in the spirit of the team-up aspect of this movie.
Exactly. All right, question number 1, guys. So 3 questions, and you get a clue if you need it. Question number 1. John McTiernan turned down the opportunity to direct another threequel in a major franchise to make this film. Which 1995 box office smash did he turn down?
Oh, this was in the Wikipedia.
I haven't read the Wikipedia. 95.
Clue. Call Al. Call Zeus.
All right.
Go to Zeus's store.
You're going to phone a friend. Okay. You're going to call Zeus. All right.
I'm going to call Simon.
There's another clue I could say, which is this has come up in today's conversation. The film starred Val Kilmer and had a hit song by U2.
Oh, Batman Forever.
Batman Forever.
McTiernan was offered Batman Forever?
He turned it down.
I wouldn't have guessed that. I would not.
What would a McTiernan Batman movie be like? Just for a second.
Oh my God.
Had they ever met the man when they offered this to him? It doesn't feel like a natural fit.
Well, Last Action Hero is pretty crazy, and meta,
but not crazy
and
in the way that that's like if Nolan directed, like it's too dark, or you know what I mean. Like McTiernan would have been. I would watch it.
Well, it would have.
I just think it's fascinating to ruminate on it.
It would have had action scenes that make sense, whereas I think in Batman Forever, I don't really know what's going on in the action sequences. But John McTiernan is so brilliant at that geography. That
yes,
I am on the record as an appreciator of Schumacher's Batman movies, but I don't necessarily defend them. I think they have things about them that are. I think Batman and Robin is better than Batman Forever. I'll say
I'm a vigorous defender of Joel Schumacher, but not his Batman movies.
I love Joel Schumacher.
I love his other movies, but not. I can't.
With you.
What's your favorite Schumacher movie?
Falling Down.
Oh yeah! Whoa! That queued up. Chris?
Probably The Lost Boys, even though it's not a great movie, but I saw it at the cinema recently at a midnight screening that Alex Winter presented, and man, that is a fun time at the movies. That is a fun movie to watch with an audience.
Oh, I would love that, especially the saxophone scene.
Sexy as hell.
Like, take my shirt off, get in there.
Yeah, that's good. I like 8mm. I wouldn't say it's my favorite. I do like 8mm, and I also like Phone Booth. I think he's
Die Hard in a phone booth.
Tigerland's the one that's, I think, underrated of his, that's sort of forgotten and never mentioned.
8mm as well is great.
Colin Farrell. He gave us Colin Farrell. You can't, he's great.
All right, let's move on. Question number 2. I really like this one. I'm patting myself on the back for this one. Jeremy Irons previously starred in a 1982 British film that shares the exact same title as one of Bruce Willis's most famous credits? Can you name it?
Moonlighting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you know the movie?
I don't know the movie,
don't know the movie,
but
no.
I thought this
It
would be
felt-
right up your alley, Liam, this movie, because it's
tell me about
it's
it.
an acclaimed drama written and directed by, forgive me if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, Jerzy Skolimowski, that won the Best Screenplay Award in the 1982 Cannes Film Festival.
I love Jerzy
Yeah, I figured you'd
Skolimowski.
probably like all over this cat. Like, what?
Wow. Oh, man. He's a good filmmaker. I got to check that out.
It's currently available for free on Tubi, Freevee, Plex, and Shout TV. So that was just an interesting fact. Okay, you're going to need to I'm glad you're collaborating because you're probably going to need to get your heads together on this final question.
Sorry, I just need to take a minute and say that can't believe I got that.
It's very impressive.
Yeah, so you're actually good at it. You're good at this quiz.
Yeah, I can't believe I got it. Okay.
All right, question
you know
number
what it
3.
was? Saying it was a Bruce Willis credit, not saying it was a movie.
Smart
Eagle-eared.
Mm-hmm. I'm the John McClane of this particular segment for this one question.
All right, you guys are going to work together on this one, I think. Okay. Question number 3. To date, Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson have appeared in a total of 5 films together. Can you name all 5?
Okay. Pulp Fiction and Die Hard.
Yeah, done.
I'm going to go with Loaded Weapon.
Correct.
Oh, shit. Good.
That was the
Wow,
Joker
Chris.
in the deck.
Chris.
Can you bring it home?
Do they share scenes in the other 2 movies?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay, so you haven't seen them.
I
Okay,
haven't
so
seen-
that eliminates,
I've seen,
that eliminates
no, they
every
do.
action
Yes,
movie.
they definitely do in one. The other one I haven't seen.
Fuck.
But one of them they definitely do. And again, there is a clue available, but I think you could probably crack it.
Yeah.
You can crack it.
Oh, man. Listen, this silence is great
Yeah.
podcasting. So
All
I'm
right,
just
let's
gonna
move.
continue to...
Let me give you the clue.
Yeah.
The other 2 films are connected in an unconventional superhero franchise.
Oh, Unbreakable and Glass.
Is correct.
Damn
Of
it.
course.
I totally forgot
Yeah.
about those movies.
shout.
And I like Unbreakable quite a lot.
Yeah, me too. It's great.
I've never seen Glass, but I love Unbreakable. I think one of Bruce Willis's best performances by far.
Well, congratulations, guys. You got
Nice job,
you got all
guys.
3
Liam.
working together.
Well played.
Chris, good
Great
good up
stuff.
to you for that.
Chris, I want you to
Damn
stick around for a minute because there's something I wanted to talk about, which is a plug that I wanted to do. So yeah, but and I want to hear what you guys, anything you want to talk about. But before you go, I wanted to talk about a project that I'm involved with, which is called American English Soccer. Now, forgive the use of that term, Chris. I know you're probably internally going nuts for I'm in that weird spot as a Brit who's been living here for 10 years. I have to refer to it that way. But I'm involved with this podcast.
You son.
And it's a show that I really love and I'm really proud to be involved with. And the 2 hosts of this show, Lewis and MC, have this incredible 360-degree knowledge of the sport that I find absolutely like flabbergasting. It covers everything they somehow know everything going on in every league, whether it's the Champions League, the Serie A, Liga 1, La Liga, Bundesliga, MLS, NWSL. If you want to know how Jude Bellingham is doing at Real Madrid, if you want to know how Christian Pulisic is doing at AC Milan, if you want to know how Harry Kane's faring in the race for the Bundesliga, these guys know absolutely everything. So the show is basically everything going on around the world in the beautiful game, all kind of squeezed and pressed into one delicious smoothie every week. And I'm there on the show now as a semi-regular guest for the English Premier League, as their kind of pundit offering my sort of irreverent opinion and analysis on it. So I know football's been something that you and I first bonded over many. I'd love to ask you about Palace, but I'm worried that the conversation will be out of date in terms of potential managerial changes that may occur in the next week between now and the time the show comes out. But it was something that I just wanted to mention. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, then search for American English Soccer wherever you get your podcast.
That sounds great. And I believe the truth is, I'm going to defend you here now, is that the English came up with the word soccer. And it came out of shortening the phrase association football. Sock is in the middle of association. and that's where soccer comes from. But it's us Brits that actually started calling it soccer. Then we stopped, and the Americans continued. So it's our fault, really.
I'm off the hook. Thank God. I thought they were going to come
you're
for
my
me.
favorite Englishman. That includes everyone on this call. I just want to give a shout out, Chris, to Clash of the Titles.
Yes.
Your podcast,
Hear, hear.
which recently ended and I love to listen to and always had a really good time listening to. And the feed will remain up. Is that correct?
Yeah. The shows are still there. Yeah, we would take two movies with something in common and discuss them both and then decide which one we like best at the end. It was just an excuse to talk about films we love and films we hate and good films and bad films. And so... yeah, I think that there's about 500 episodes probably out there.
Wow,
something like that. I think we got up to 450. And I guess people that listen to your show love action movies. We've done a lot of the same action movies, a lot of the Die Hard on a Blank films, but we go a bit further back. There's First Blood we did recently, RoboCop, Top Gun, Predator, Karate Kid versus No Retreat, No Surrender. That was a favorite of mine. Have you guys seen No Retreat, No Surrender?
I haven't actually.
I haven't. One of Van Damme's early credits, right?
He's sort of a voiceless villain in it, but yeah, it's the Karate Kid plot. But the kid, rather than getting lessons from Mr. Miyagi, he gets lessons from the ghost of Bruce Lee. And it's as
oh wow,
it's as bad as that sounds. It's as bad as that sounds, and it is fantastic. So yeah, Clash of the Titles. It's out there.
Well, I'll recommend a couple of episodes, if I may, that I have listened to multiple times because I love Clash of the Titles, and I was
great show. It's one of the first podcasts Phil ever told me about.
And
Phil introduced me to it.
Genuinely inspired me to pursue this, and Chris is truly one of the nicest people I've ever met, especially in this industry, and was so kind in giving me advice and when I was first thinking about this project, and has helped me so many times throughout my career and life in so many amazing ways of actually genuinely helping, like playing our trailer on your show. The one episode that I particularly love of your show was the Red Heat versus Tango and Cash episode, which I've listened to probably 3 times because I love both of those movies, but I particularly have a weird obsessional love for Red Heat as a sort of marginalized movie from the 80s that I feel like it was just on telly on ITV all the time.
On ITV, right? On ITV on a Saturday night, and the news would be on at 10 o'clock, cutting it up. You get an hour and then the news and then an hour. With freaking adverts.
The news at 10 with
they
Trevor
would
McDonald.
Interrupt the movie with the news? Wow, that would not happen in the USA of entertainment, my friends. We wouldn't do that.
I mean, I will say, I think that episode, those 2 episodes, we did more laughing than actual talking. But yeah, man, it's fun revisiting these action movies, as you guys are discovering. Like, they're some of the most fun of the films that we covered was dumb action.
Yeah, it was a wonderful show. Important. Episodes are all there. Fog versus the Mist was another one that I love, but there's you can find whatever your favorite movie is. Chances are these guys have covered it. They're absolutely fantastic. It's an amazing show.
Really great show.
Thank you, fellas.
What else? What's going on at Dexerto? Tell us a bit about that.
Just covering movies, covering TV. This will be out of date by the time you put this out, but the Oscar nominations are out today, so we did a ton of writing on that. Yeah, so come to us.
Thank you for alerting me. This is what I wanted to ask you about. Thank you for alerting me to the 4 nominations for The Pope's Exorcist, a movie that I think should be up for as many Academy Awards as possible.
I posted the nominations on Twitter, and people are saying that Five Nights at Freddy's didn't get 5 nominations. I don't know what people are talking about.
I think it's actually that Night at Freddy's got 5 nominations. Okay. That's actually what I think of. No, I'm a huge Pope's Exorcist fan. I want 400 sequels to that movie. I think it's awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, that's about it, folks. Unless you have anything final thoughts,
I have one small
Liam.
plug.
Yeah,
Speaking of revisiting action movies, which is if you're a fan of this show, you should probably revisit the 1990 Paul Verhoeven incredible piece of work, Total Recall, because we'll be talking about it on Eye of the Duck with our friends Adam and Dom in the very near future. Hopefully, right after this episode comes out. So, Total Recall. You should revisit it. You should also revisit. You should also revisit Under Siege 2: Dark Territory. so that we can not talk about it in 2 weeks, but instead just talk about the GOAT, Eric Bogosian, Succession star and playwright and genius. That's our next movie, Under Siege 2. Chris, have you seen Under Siege 2?
I have. I couldn't tell you anything that happens in it.
Yeah, I watched it last week and I couldn't tell you anything that happens in it either. It evaporates instantly.
But those could be the most fun to talk
one.
about, as I'm saying, as you guys know.
Yeah.
Well, if Eric Bogosian's in it, then and we can talk about talk radio and everything else that genius has done, then we'll find a way to make that a very interesting and entertaining hour.
It's going to be special. All right,
Chris, God bless you. It's been lovely to see you. Great to have you on and all your insights.
Thank you, Chris.
And diligent research and hot takes and just your general wonderfulness. Brilliant to have you here, my friend. And we'll be back next time, I guess.
We'll be back next time with not a very good sequel. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. Special thanks to Suki Chu. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.